My name is Miguel Navarro from Group 3, Business Law, Course 2301. And today we're going to be discussing a U.S. business breaking its ethical responsibilities. The title for this project is The Thin Line Between Legal and Ethical, Case Studies in Business Laws. This slide is a table of contents, and it will highlight each slide with its title and information needed to be able to navigate through this project.
My name is Hunter Crumry, and I'm here to give y'all an overview of the Citibank lawsuit. So in January 2024, the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, filed a lawsuit against Citibank alleging that the bank failed to adequately protect their customers from online fraud. The bank also refused to reimburse those victims of those scams. The lawsuit claims that Citibank's insufficient security measures allowed scammers to access customers' accounts and steal funds through unauthorized wire transfers. However, Citibank tried to dismiss the lawsuit by arguing that the Electronic Fund Transfer Act does not apply to wire transfers, which instead is covered by Article 4A of the Union Commercial Code. The ethical issue and problem that Citibank is facing is the failure to protect its customers from phishing and smishing scams, and the failure to reimburse those victims from said scams. This is a concern to the bank's duty of care because their responsibility is to ensure secure digital banking systems and its ethical obligation to support and compensate customers harmed due to its security failures. The broader impact is this case highlights the growing concerns over financial institutions' responsibilities in the digital age. As online scams get harder to crack, banks are under more scrutiny to implement better security measures and support victims of fraud. What are the legal implications, you might ask? Well, legally, the case centers on whether Citibank violated the Electronic Fund Transfer Act, or the EFTA, which strives to protect consumers from unauthorized electronic fund transfers. Citibank argued that the EFTA does not apply to wire transfers, but a federal judge ruled that the law could apply to certain aspects of consumer-initiated wire transfers. There are many concerns surrounding Citibank. To start, the breach of duty of care. This is where banks have an ethical obligation to safeguard their customers' assets. Secondly, the lack of transparency and accountability. Citibank is accused of misleading their customers about their rights after fraud incidences and even coercing them into signing affidavits that limit their ability to get those losses back. And then finally, Citibank failed to protect their customers. By refusing to reimburse the victims of their fraud, Citibank has failed in its ethical responsibility to protect its consumers, especially when the fraud came from vulnerabilities within the bank's own systems.
On this slide, we will be discussing, does this bring issues regarding corporate social responsibilities? And the answer is yes. One of the few is as follows. Ethical responsibilities. Citibank's alleged failure to protect its customers from scams and fraud highlights a breach in ethical responsibilities. Under CSR, the company practices cannot cause harm to its stakeholders, including customers. Stakeholder protection. CSR principles emphasize that stakeholders include any group affected by corporate decision-making. Citibank's customers being directly impacted by the company's security measures fall under this category. The alleged neglect to safeguard customer accounts and reimburse fraud victims shows a failure to protect these stakeholders. So, accountability. CSR states that companies are expected to be accountable for their actions and decisions. Citibank's alleged shortcomings in protecting its customers and addressing fraud claims suggest a lack of accountability, which is a fundamental aspect of CSR.
Hello, my name is Rima Rahman, and on this slide we explore several ethical frameworks and how they apply to Citibank's actions. First, utilitarianism focuses on doing the greatest good for the greatest number. When Citibank allegedly failed to protect customers from scams, it caused financial harm to many people. Secondly, under the idea of duty of care and professional responsibility, Citibank is expected to treat its clients ethically and professionally. Failing to implement strong anti-fraud measures and not in reimbursing scam victims would break both legal and moral expectations. Lastly, deontological ethics, or Kantianism, stresses doing the right thing regardless of the outcomes. Citibank had an ethical duty to protect its clients, and ignoring repeated scam patterns suggests a serious violation of that duty.
So moving on, we have the ethical principle of care. The ethical principle of care emphasizes the responsibility people have to those who are reliant or dependent on them, particularly in relationship of trust. Citibank broke the trust of its clients by not assisting them in a responsible way and also just not protecting them in the first place. The system that Citibank had in place was vulnerable, and instead of taking the responsibility for that vulnerability that they had, they brought it to court. So they failed to uphold the ethical principle of care because they were negligent in protecting their clients. The principle of justice requires fair and equitable treatment of all clients and stakeholders. Citibank failed to uphold this principle as it was negligent of its clients who rely on the bank to protect their finances. Citibank violated both the ethical principle of justice as well as violating legal standards like the Electronic Fund Transfer Act.
Here we focus on some of the ethical recommendations for Citibank. First, enhancing fraud prevention systems is key. By investing in better fraud detection technology, Citibank can reduce harm and meet its moral duty to protect customers, aligning with both utilitarian values and its duty of care. Second, reimbursing scam victims is crucial. Ethically, Citibank should compensate victims, especially when warning signs were ignored. This reflects deontological ethics, where doing the right thing, regardless of the cost, is the priority. Finally, increasing transparency and communication. By keeping customers informed about fraud risks and safety practices, Citibank can build trust and fulfill its broader social and ethical responsibilities.
So moving on, we have our conclusion and recommendations for Citibank and the business community going forward. For Citibank, they could implement a stronger system that better detects fraud and scams to prevent any future fraud and scams from occurring, to prevent the problem from happening in the first place. Citibank could establish a designated team with the primary purpose of handling scam reports. This team could help ensure that the funds are returned fully and promptly to the client, as opposed to what happened in this particular case. And some recommendations for the business community as a whole. Other banks should adopt these recommendations that I just mentioned while also improving their own fraud and scam detection systems in any way that they can to prevent something like this from happening under their nose. Banks should also collaborate and establish a standard fraud response protocol to ensure client protection across all the banks involved. So just to create a better system against scam and fraud in general, so that other banks don't find themselves in the same situation that Citibank found themselves in due to a weak fraud and scam system. Continuing on, as far as penalties and punishments go, any bank that repeatedly fails to protect its clients, penalties should unquestionably be levied against them until true protection is fulfilled. In the case of Citibank, they failed to protect their clients initially and then showed negligence in assisting the client that was not protected. Stronger penalties would incentivize the banks to install better systems, anti-fraud and anti-scam systems, by increasing the financial cost of non-compliance. So not complying with the rules is going to cost you a lot of money, so therefore you are going to want to follow the rules. And the overall impact of this lawsuit is that it highlighted ethical weak points and systemic issues within Citibank, and that implementing the recommendations listed here would not only protect vulnerable clients in the future, but it would also help raise the ethical standard as a whole across the entire banking industry.
Different slide. This is where you will find the works cited information that we have collected to be able to address some of the information on this project.